MashaAllah, I remember last time we had a conference, and if I remember correctly, it was in that talk that you talked about a woman's responsibility in that sexual relationship to understand herself and understand her truth. Remember, you were talking about, understanding what gets you to that place and taking responsibility for that. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was saying that I really believe that it's a woman's responsibility to prioritize her orgasm. But actually, more than that, it's really prioritize pleasure. I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of Muslim women have been raised to believe that sex isn't something that was meant created for them. It was created for a man's orgasm or male pleasure. And it's not necessary for you as the woman to experience pleasure. And it doesn't matter if you as the woman don't experience orgasm. None of that comes from Islam. Islam teaches us that Allah created sex for both male and female pleasure. If you dive into authentic sources, dive into what the Quran and the Sunnah and the Hadith say about pleasure, it's really that pleasure was created for both the man and the woman. And so when you understand that as a woman, it's important to prioritize that and remember that Allah created sex for your pleasure as a woman. And so if Allah created sex for your pleasure as a woman, you need to go and seek it. You need to go and seek it out.
So I remember when you delivered a talk and you were talking about a woman's responsibility for her own kind of her own sexual state and her part in that sexual relationship, and how, her being aware of what turns her on, of what gets her to that place, what gets her in the mood, allows her, it actually empowers her to feel sexual without the need for example, her husband to necessarily perform X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
And I remember, firstly for me, it kind of made so much sense because so many of us as women, obviously, we complain about not being in the mood, right? And like it's like he always wants it, but it's like, I'm not in the mood because
Mhm.
it's all up here. And
Mhm.
when you said taking responsibility for your own part that you play in that dance, it made so much sense to me. And I think if more women understood what that means and were able to kind of leverage their ability to get themselves to that place, I think maybe would avoid a lot of the kind of mismatch in sexual desire between men and women. But just explain what you meant by that, sort of a woman taking responsibility for her own kind of the role she plays in the sexual relationship.
Yeah, so what we're seeing obviously is that most men, regardless of religion, really, most men have kind of been programmed that sex was created for them and their pleasure. If you're
Mm-hmm.
programmed that way, it's a belief that you have. So imagine that you're a man and you're programmed that when you have sex, it's meant to be pleasurable for you. You're meant to ejaculate an orgasm and it's meant to feel really good. And so
Mm-hmm.
men believe that, oh, wow, sex was created for me. I'm meant to experience pleasure. I'm meant to orgasm and it's meant to feel really good.
This
So
is going to be
they
great.
yeah, so they go into so men go into a sexual experience with their wives expecting it to feel good. And
Okay.
they will do whatever they need to do with their wife,
Mm-hmm.
whatever stimulation they need to receive from their wife. They will they will expect it, but not necessarily demand it. Most husbands are good. They won't demand it, but they will have that expectation. And they
Mm-hmm.
usually will communicate with their wife before or during, or, move their body in a certain way to bring themselves to pleasure and lead them
Mm.
to orgasm because they have
Mm.
the belief. Women, on the other hand, girls, on the other hand, have not been taught that, have not been taught that sex was created for them, that
Mhm.
sex is meant to be pleasurable for you, and that you're meant to orgasm. But what's important for women is to start believing that sex was created by Allah for your pleasure. So start
Mm.
programming yourself, just like men were programmed by society. Society did the opposite to females, but we need to debunk that
Mhm.
and go back to the true source and say, okay, Allah created sex for me. And if you want the evidence, go and do your research. There is evidence in the Quran and the Sunnah, the fact that the Prophet Muhammad SAW enjoyed sexual pleasure with his wives, but
Mhm.
equally his wives experience pleasure with their husband, the Prophet Muhammad SAW. So you as a woman need to emulate that. We are, all as Muslims, we are all trying to emulate the Prophet. And it's not just the fact that he was a man and thinking, yes, he was meant to experience pleasure, but his wives also experience pleasure. So we as women need to be emulating that. They are our role models. So start with the belief that Allah created sex for me. If I'm a woman, I need to believe Allah created sex for me. Allah created sex for me to experience pleasure. Allah created sex for me to experience orgasm if I'm able to. When you start with that, you then will start thinking, okay, what is it that I need to know? What does it need to know about my body, or any kind of bits of education with regards to sex? What is it that will help me experience that pleasure that Allah created for me? It is very much possible. You need to believe that it can be your reality to experience pleasure, but there may be certain things that you don't know about your body. So go on that journey of educating yourself about your body and being willing to experiment with your husband with regards to finding what works for you and your unique self and unique body. And in terms of prioritizing pleasure, I really believe that if more women prioritize pleasure, prioritize their orgasm in the context of sex with their husband, they will enjoy sex more. They will not see sex as a chore, because sex is not meant to be a chore. They will finally experience an amazing sex life with their husband, and they will naturally start to desire it more. Just like if you eat a really delicious cake, you will desire that cake more. You will crave that cake more. The same applies to sex. If you experience really pleasurable sex with your spouse, you will naturally want to experience that more and more. So prioritize your orgasm, prioritize pleasure. And I really feel like it will make such a difference to your marriage, because sex is a big part of marriage. Your sexuality is a big part of marriage. Obviously, it's not the only thing, but it is a big thing. And I find that when there are issues sexually within the marriage, it can usually have negative knock-on effects to other areas of your marriage. And so really, like, not kind of, I think a lot of women tend to see sex as this thing that's not very important, and I will kind of just have sex with my husband whenever he wants it, and it's not that important. But actually, sex is a big foundation in your marriage. And so start seeing it as something that I need to prioritize. And one thing that will help women prioritize it more is remembering and reminding yourself that sex in your marriage is an act of worship. We are rewarded when we do any act of worship: praying, reading Quran, fasting, giving charity. Sex is equally an act of worship. So it is very important to educate yourself about it, prioritize it, and know that you are being rewarded. And I have found that when I went from that place and understood that, it really helped my connection with Allah, subhanallah, because when I was able to experience more pleasure and orgasm in my marriage, I felt kind of in awe of Allah's generosity, that Allah wants me to feel this good, and He's rewarding me for it in this life and the next. That's amazing. Like, really, when you think of, yeah, exactly. So I think that that's the message I want women to start programming themselves with, is sex was created for me as a woman, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to find out how to make sex pleasurable and orgasm. And I'm going to communicate with my husband, and we're going to work as a team. And inshallah, just watch how many positive effects it has in your marriage.
I absolutely love that. And I think, if I remember correctly, we talked about before about two different kinds of desire. Spontaneous desire and responsive desire.
Yeah.
So, for example, if a woman knows that she's more inclined to the responsive desire, and for example, she needs to smell nice in order for her to feel in the mood, right? Or she needs to be clean because or she needs the lights low, or she needs certain smells.
Yeah.
I remember you saying, do it then. Like, make that happen, and this is what, for me, what was really empowering about it was, again, we have this narrative that men always want it, and husbands always want it, and wives are always trying to put it off. The whole "I've got a headache" trope. It's been a long day, if you help me with the kids more, maybe if you did the dishes more. Basically, I don't want this with you. Right. And it's the Muslim version, I'm gonna have to make ghusl. I just got my hair done, these types of things, right?
Yeah.
So there's this narrative that husbands want it and wives are trying to put it off. And when I heard you talking about, firstly, I mean, from where I'm sitting, and what I came to understand was that we know that Islamically, the husband and the wife have the right to enjoy each other. It's one of the one of the foundations of the nikah. You become halal for each other. You both have sexual rights, which means that you both have sexual responsibilities. And so, you know, taking it from the woman's side, from the wife's side, and I know it's not a very sexy way of saying it, and it's not very fashionable, but the reality is that you have a responsibility because he has a right, therefore you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility as a wife to take care of him in that way. Now, of course, people don't want to hear that because we've got this idea that sex should be this spontaneous thing and that desire should be this big passionate wave that kind of pushes you forward. And if you don't have that, then you're not in the mood and you shouldn't have to do anything, right? And kind of what I've learned along the way is that when you understand that, okay, I want my husband to fulfill himself in a halal way with me, therefore I have a part to play. What is that part? Is it changing my mindset around sex? Is it looking at how my timetable or my list of activities is impacting our sex life? Is it, as you say, taking control of the factors I can control and getting myself into that mood so that it's a very small bridge between us, you know what I mean? Rather than putting all the heavy lifting on him and say, well, show me something then. Like, okay, you want it? All right then, make it happen, you know? And there's kind of this combative kind of like, well, you know, I don't want to, but yeah, okay, fine, if we have to, you know, type of thing. I mean, what do you think about that?
I love that you said that. And I want to say one tip that will, inshallah, change, you know, if there's a woman here listening to this and she's feeling everything you just said, there's one thing that will really help, and it's going to sound not very sexy, but it is going to, inshallah, make a difference. And that is to schedule sex.
Yes.
It sounds like, whoa, you're telling me to schedule sex. Isn't sex meant to be spontaneous? No,
meant to be.
Exactly.
It's this whole thing about the spontaneous desire.
Exactly. I mean, says who? Says who? Who says it's meant to be spontaneous? Did Allah say that? No. Allah never said that you can't have sex if you schedule it.
Where's your dalil?
Exactly. So I'm saying schedule sex because whenever you have something important, there's a time for it. You know when that appointment's going to be, and you usually will put it in your calendar or diary if you have one, or you'll just know that, okay, this is the time that I'm meant to be doing this appointment, this priority. So do the same with sex. Schedule it, whether physically putting it on your calendar or diary, and you know, you don't have to label it as sex, but it could just be time with my husband. You could just label it that, something, you know, something that you don't care if someone else were to see that. And making it a regular thing that you do. Obviously, you know, if you can't do it for whatever reason, you know, you were ill or you're on your period, whatever it is, fine. But you kind of have a general regular schedule for when you have sex. And why this works for a lot of women is because, as I mentioned earlier, most women experience responsive desire. So they need the right context. They need to feel safe, comfortable. They need to feel ready mentally, physically. They need to be in the right context environmentally, like the right surroundings, but also feel mentally and emotionally in the right context. When you schedule it and you know that, okay, I'm going to be having sex and intimate time with my husband Saturday at 9 p.m. on a regular schedule. And you can start with like once a week, for example, except when you're on your period, you just don't have to do it that day. If you know that, okay, I'm going to be enjoying this, I'm going to be having this time with my husband, and I want to make the most of that time. I want to make sure it's pleasurable for me. What do I as a woman need to do in the days leading up to that, you know, Saturday at 9 p.m? What do I as a woman need to prepare? What can I communicate with my husband with regards to, if I have kids, how can he perhaps do bedtime that day so I can go and have a nice bath or go for a walk or read a book or just have me time, whatever it is. So engaging in self-care time before sex is really important for a woman, having time to herself before enjoying time with her husband. But equally, changing your mindset to see that sex is not a chore, and sex is meant to be for your pleasure too, and sex is also meant to be your self-care time with your husband.